I'm going to give my personal opinion on the 4 most popular brands at PetSmart. Let's start with the very popular Science Diet Kibble. My hot take is I wouldn't personally feed this to my dogs, but it's not all bad. I love that they give back to shelter and rescue animals. I'm surrounded by rescue dogs now. You can see that on the front of their packaging. I also like that they have chicken early in the ingredient deck, and it is an accessible food, but there's some concerns that I have. Sure, chicken is the first ingredient, but it's quickly followed by a lot of corn and cereal grain, the whole grain wheat, cracked barley, whole grain sorghum, corn gluten meal. So my first red flag is I see ingredient splitting, which is something many brands do, and it's an ick for me, where brands take a less desirable ingredient, corn in this situation, and they break it up into sub-ingredients like corn gluten meal. And what that does is make corn seem lower on the ingredient deck than maybe it actually is. So if you were to combine those corn sub-ingredients into one ingredient, corn, it would probably be much higher on the ingredient deck. And brands know that pet parents are becoming much more informed, and this is really only problematic for me because I feel like it's often misleading. I'm also seeing that with the grains, whole grain wheat, barley, sorghum. There's a lot of cereal in this food. So again, if we were to combine all those cereal ingredients into one, I'm very confident that that chicken as the first ingredient would drop down quite a bit. Sorghum is an ingredient that can be controversial. There was actually a study that saw dogs who were fed sorghum mill feed produce more feces and had overall lower nutrient digestibility. Now that study showed there could be potential nutritional benefits of that ingredient, but again, when we have all these cereal grains high up in the ingredient deck, it's concerning. Remember, dogs don't have a biological requirement for carbohydrates in their diet. It's not to say they should have 0 carbs, but when I see a food that's really high in carbohydrates like this food, I'm less excited about it. Speaking of carbs, that's one of the first things I look at in a food. But if you look at the ingredient deck and the guaranteed analysis, you're not going to see carbohydrates on the food, which is unfortunate. And I hope that changes in the near future. The way to calculate the estimated carbs in your dog's kibble is on the screen here. And in this food, it's about 50% carbohydrates, which is really, really high for dogs considering they are facultative or scavenging carnivores, meaning they can have some carbohydrates in their diet, but they definitely thrive in the presence of healthy, quality sourced meat. And again, looking at the ingredients, I see that they add chicken liver and a copper supplement, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does raise a red flag for me because I do worry about copper toxicity, copper storage issues. And when we look at the last half of the ingredients, looks like they have over 18 vitamin synthetics, and it looks like they're using a vitamin premix, which again, the reason that brands use these is because kibbles, I'm not anti-kibble, but the fact is kibble is cooked and extruded multiple times at extremely high temperatures. This means most of the moisture is removed and many of the nutrients can be removed. So they have to spray them back on. In a perfect world, I'm feeding my dogs a diet where they're getting most, if not all, of their micro and macronutrients from real whole food sources. Anytime we look at a pet food, I think it's important to know who manufactures, who makes that food. And Colgate owns Hill's Science Diet, which again, isn't inherently bad, but if we step back and think about what are their intentions as this massive conglomerate, it probably and likely are going to be profits. So for me, when I'm thinking of what food to feed my dogs, I want to make sure that the company's intentions behind the food are optimal nutrition, longevity, and wellness for my pets, not bottom line dollar and trying to get the cheapest ingredients for the most money. Now that leads me to some of the potential pros of this food. One being the price. Looking at this bag specifically at PetSmart in my area, again, this can fluctuate a little bit. It comes out to about $2.26 per pound. I don't see artificial flavors or coloring, which is a good thing. And it looks like they add a little bit of taurine, which can be good for heart health. Okay, now we're gonna have a dog switch and let's jump to natural balance. My hot take with this is the front of the bag frustrates me. In big, bold marketing letters, it says limited ingredients. So I flipped the bag over and I looked at the ingredients. There were 43. What constitutes limited ingredients? This seems like a lot to me, and that's a bit of an ick. Now, I love seeing meat and meat meals up front. Meat meals are another controversial ingredients because they are considered feed grade. They are ultra processed. So many veterinarians and nutritionists are worried about the bioavailability of the protein and the nutrition, but it does help increase the amount of animal meat protein in the food. Another instance of ingredient splitting, I see potatoes in here, looks like 3 different times. And again, potatoes inherently aren't bad, but that just means that this food is pretty heavy in potatoes. And that just depends, is that the kind of food you want to feed your dog? And then they have big claims that their food is good for heart health or promotes heart health. And that's great. I want my dogs to have a healthy heart. Looks like they're using taurine to make this claim, but taurine is listed after salt. So those that have subscribed know about the salt divider rule, meaning anything listed after salt only represents up to 1% of the total bag. So there's not very much taurine in there. And candidly, I don't know how much is needed to truly promote heart health. And when I count the vitamin and mineral synthetics, there's 25. So it's really heavy in these premixes. And the protein percent is a little lower than I prefer for a kibble. I like seeing at least 25, 26% protein, where a majority of the protein's coming from animal meat. This is at 24, so a little bit lower than I personally like. And when we calculate the carbs, again, I'll put the formula on the screen for how to do that. And again, it's estimated carbs. It's 50% estimated carbs in these foods. Now, there are some pros, potentially, based on what you're looking for. There's no wheat, soy, or grain. A lot of people like to avoid that. And they do add a little bit of taurine, which I think a lot of people look for. It's also a little overpriced, in my personal opinion, for what it is. It's about $3 a pound at the PetSmart near me. It's just a little expensive for the starchy ingredients compared to what I would feed my dog. But again, I leave it up to you. Would you feed this food? Remember, I'm here to help you make an informed decision for your pet, not based on fear or misleading marketing, so that you can use this information to make the best choice with your veterinarian. Again, I'm not here to recommend, cure, treat, prescribe, simply here to help you get the right information. Now let's talk about a PetSmart owned brand called Authority, and this is definitely a budget-friendly food. First off, looking at the food, I see ingredient splitting again with corn gluten meal, so it's a pretty heavy in corn food. Corn is highly controversial. I mean, I like a little corn on the cob in the summer, so I'm not anti-corn, but it's pretty well known that it's a highly GMO, highly sprayed with pesticide crop. So it's one that a lot of, we'll call purists or nutritionists and a lot of integrative and holistic veterinarians steer clear of. In fact, in the first 6 ingredients, 4 of them are non-species appropriate foods or ingredients that I would feed my dogs. Like many brands, they use natural flavoring, which is controversial because that can contain a variety of things that are not disclosed to you. And especially if you have a dog with sensitivities or allergies, this can be problematic. Legally, natural flavoring can include almost any protein. So it could have pork in there, it could have beef, could have chicken, which again, if your dog has sensitivities to that, could be an issue. It can also include bark, different essential oils. So that's just something to be aware of. If your dog has sensitivities, you'll need to reach out to the brand directly and find out what is in those natural flavors. It's also a controversial ingredient because many believe that if you are making a food with whole, real foods that dogs are designed to eat, that you shouldn't need to add artificial or natural flavorings to the food to entice them to eat it. They should just want to eat it, is a theory of many. And even though we see meat in the first couple of ingredients, the protein percent is still 25%, and the carbohydrates are actually a little bit lower in this food than the others, which is about 47%. Another red flag controversial ingredient is the use of sodium hexametaphosphate, which is used regularly in dog dental chews and dog dental treats. And it's concerning because according to this study, this can lead to digestive upset. So it's something that if your dog is on this food and they have GI issues, loose stool, just digestive issues, it might be worth considering finding another food. Now I have to say the biggest pro of this food is accessibility. It is probably one of the lowest cost foods I've seen there. I think it's about $1.79 a pound, which makes it easy for those on a very limited or fixed income to afford a food for their dog. And they have single source protein options, which can be good for dogs that have multiple sensitivities to kind of single it out. But again, they do use natural flavoring, so there could be something used in there. So you'd have to ask the brand. Overall, this isn't a food I would personally feed my dogs. I do like the price point though, because I do want everybody who can have a dog be able to have a dog. I just want you to be able to make informed decisions on what you're feeding, which leads me to this next food, which is Solid Gold, a very popular food. And to be quite honest, I don't hate it. Probably not a food I'd feed my dogs, but there's some misleading marketing tactics, at least what I believe them to be misleading, that is a major ick for me that kind of turn me off on the food. So right away on the front of the bag, I see their callouts for cold water salmon and vegetables in the recipe. So I imagine when we turn the bag over and look at the ingredients, we're gonna see a lot of healthy, nutrient-dense vegetables. We'll look in just a moment. And I see not one, but 2 callouts for gut health, and that this recipe is powerful enough to promote gut health, which is very important. So this must be an awesome formula. Let's look at the back. I love seeing fish high on the ingredient deck. That can be great for dogs with like chicken or beef sensitivities, but be wary that they use an ocean fish meal. And since it does not specify what fish is used in that, your dog may have a sensitivity to some of the fish used in there. And this brand also uses natural flavoring, which could include chicken or beef or essential oils. All right, so let's go look for these vegetables that are promoted on the front of the bag, which is prime real estate marketing for any pet food. And early in the ingredient deck, I'm seeing a lot of legumes, so much so that it kind of makes me feel like there's a bit of ingredient splitting in here, which to be fair, legumes technically fall in the vegetable family. So I think a more accurate description of this food is a fish and bean recipe, because we don't know if it's exclusively salmon. So I would look at this as a fish and bean recipe. Okay, now if we look further down in the ingredients, we see carrots, that's awesome. And I see what I think are their gut health promoting ingredients: blueberry, pumpkin, cranberry. And at the very end, I see a probiotic. Remember, they said gut health all over the front of the bag, but remember, these are listed after salt, so they only represent up to 1%. So at what point should we put things on a front of a bag as marketing to get us interested to buy that only represent less than 1% of the total product? You tell me, does that feel misleading? Do you feel like the bag gave more promise than it actually delivered? Again, it's up to you and what you would feel comfortable feeding your dog. This information, I want to make clear, is based on my background working in the pet food industry, earning my bachelor's degree in nutrition science, and being a certified professional canine nutritionist. That said, this review is based on all the information I have in front of me today. Things change regularly, which is why I recommend for you to sign up and join my email list, which I'll have linked in the description below. Now let's look at the price point. So this one is going to be the most expensive of the ones I've looked at about $3.32 per pound at my local PetSmart. And they do have a little bit higher protein percent and a little bit lower carb percent than some of the others we've talked about. So in my opinion, those are good things. They do have over 20 vitamin synthetics, so a lot of synthetics packed into this food to help make it complete and balanced. And I know a lot of people are looking for this. They add taurine in the food. So I would say this is definitely a middle to upper end priced food. Now, the hard thing with feeding any of these mass-produced bigger brand foods is when you mass produce anything, even outside of the pet space, there's risk. Any pet food, there's risk, but especially when you're mass producing, especially when you're backed by big investments or big businesses and corporations that are heavily focused on margins, it can put our pets potentially at risk for having, let's say, contamination in the food or one of the vitamin premixed synthetics, because these are synthetics, to be made incorrectly, maybe a little too much of something or a little too less of something, which means our dogs suffer. So one thing I always recommend, and work with your vet, but at least with my dogs, I'm constantly rotating brands. I have at least 3 different brands on deck, and I'm rotating my dogs. I'll have videos linked below on how I transition my dogs to a new food and how often I rotate, but it's basically every week, every other week, every 2 weeks, I'll be putting them on a different brand, because undoubtedly the food you're feeding your dog today will eventually likely have a recall and or a recipe change that may not agree with your dog. And I don't say this to scare you, it's just the reality of mass production. It's the reality of producing food for humans or pets. Now I share that because I'm gonna give you a few of the Kibble brands that I would feed my dogs if I was feeding Kibble. Now I am privileged and fortunate and blessed enough to be in a position, which took many years, to be able to feed my dogs a fresher food diet. I do some DIY. I also feed my dogs some gently cooked food as well as some raw foods, complete and balanced, really highly quality sourced foods. All of my favorite personal brands are on my dog food list. You can find that on my website, RachelFusaro.com, or you can find it linked in the description or the comments below. It's my full review on all the brands that I personally would feel comfortable feeding my own dogs. But to name a couple kibbles that as of this moment right now, but again, this can always change. Recipes, companies, ownerships change. But as of this very moment, a few of the brands that stand out to me that are kibble are going to be Farmina, Open Farm, specifically their raw mix line I like of any of their recipes. I think that for a budget-friendly food, Nutrisource or From could be decent for, again, budget-friendly. They, again, have some things that I don't love, but could be good for some dogs. I also typically like Nature's Logic. So those are just some of the brands that I find mini dogs do well on, that typically have better sourcing in general. I'll have those all linked down below so you can check them out and do your own research with your vet. Now, if you want to learn even more about what I'm feeding my dogs, click the video right here, but make sure you subscribe first. And if you want to see how I make my dog's food, click the video right here. And I hope you have a beautiful day. Bye.